Clara tightened her grip on the small bag slung over her shoulder, its weight a stark reminder of the few possessions she could call her own. The imposing iron gates of the mansion loomed ahead, guarding a world far removed from her reality. As the gates creaked open, revealing the sprawling estate and its meticulously manicured gardens, Clara's heart raced, not with excitement, but with unease. She wasn't sure if it was the sheer grandeur of the place or the unshakable sense that she was crossing a threshold into a life she might never fully belong to. The house itself was a monument to wealth, a declaration of success built brick by Leonardo Velasco, a man whose name was synonymous with power and financial triumph. Clara had only seen him in newspaper clippings and online articles, his sharp jawline and piercing gaze conveying authority in every image. But here, behind the gleaming walls of his home, he was just a name she wasn't sure she was ready to encounter in person. Inside, the air was heavy with an eerie stillness. Every detail of the mansion's interior, polished marble floors, intricate chandeliers, and furniture that looked more like art than objects of use, was a silent testament to the family's opulence. Yet for all its beauty, there was a coldness to the space, as though the walls themselves held secrets that even the grandeur couldn't conceal. Clara's employer, Mrs. Maria, the head housekeeper, ushered her through the house with swift efficiency. "You'll focus on cleaning the west wing," Maria instructed, her tone clipped. "Especially Mr. Velasco's office. He's particular about that space, so don't touch anything unless it's necessary." Clara nodded, though Maria's warning sent a ripple of curiosity through her, particular about his office. She filed the thought away, silently vowing not to overstep. At least, not yet. She busied herself with mundane tasks, but her thoughts wandered. What kind of man could build such a fortune, wield such influence? Clara couldn't help but think of her own struggles, her life of scrimping and saving, trying to navigate the endless maze of bills and broken dreams. Money had always been elusive to her, slipping through her fingers like sand no matter how tightly she tried to hold it. Here, she was surrounded by its overwhelming presence, yet the air felt no lighter. If anything, the weight of finances and their grip on this household was palpable in every corner. In the days that followed, Clara settled into a routine. She learned to maneuver through the unspoken rules of the mansion, avoiding the gaze of Leonardo and his teenage daughter, Sophia. Sophia was a girl of contradictions. Her designer clothes and effortless confidence clashed with the quiet sadness in her eyes. Clara often found herself wondering what burden Sophia carried, what cracks might lay hidden beneath her polished exterior. One evening, while cleaning Mr. Velasco's office, Clara's attention was drawn to a shelf of leather-bound books. Among them was an old journal, its spine cracked with age. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the edge, torn between her curiosity and Maria's stern warning. A sudden sound from the hallway startled her, and she withdrew her hand quickly, her pulse racing. She hadn't done anything wrong, but the mere thought of being caught filled her with dread. What could be in a journal that a man like Leonardo might need to hide? Later that night, as Clara lay on the narrow cot in her modest quarters, her mind raced with questions. The mansion, for all its wealth, was a place of shadows. There was something beneath its surface, a tension she couldn't quite name. And yet, Clara felt a strange pull to uncover it, as though her arrival here wasn't mere coincidence, but the start of something much larger. As she stared at the ceiling, the soft hum of rain against the window lulling her into thought, a realization dawned on her. Sometimes life wasn't just about surviving. Sometimes it was about understanding what lay beneath the surface. What stories were hidden in the folds of wealth and power? What secrets did Leonardo Velasco, with all his money and influence, carry behind his cold, calculated eyes? Before drifting to sleep, a small thought flickered in her mind. How many lives have been shaped by money, and how many lives could be changed if secrets like these were uncovered? If you've ever felt the pull of a mystery like this, share your thoughts below. What would you do in Clara's place? The quiet hum of the mansion was deceptive. Beneath its gleaming marble floors and ornate ceilings, Clara felt an undercurrent of tension she couldn't quite explain. Days turned into a blur of routine, dusting priceless vases, polishing furniture that seemed untouched, and carefully avoiding Leonardo's piercing gaze whenever he passed by. He wasn't unkind, but there was an intensity about him that made her feel exposed, as though he could see right through her. One afternoon, as Clara tended to the West Wing, she found herself alone in Leonardo's office. It was a room that seemed both meticulously curated and carelessly lived in. The mahogany desk, though polished to perfection, bore faint scratches and scuff marks, signs of restless movement. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books on business, economics and leadership, their spines worn from frequent use. Papers lay scattered across the desk, along with an expensive-looking pen left uncapped. Among them was a folded document marked with bold red letters, "Confidential." She hesitated, her hand lingering just above the desk. Curiosity tugged at her. What could be so important that it needed such a warning? But Maria's warning echoed in her mind. Don't touch anything unless it's necessary. Clara drew her hand back and focused on dusting the shelves instead, her heart pounding as though she'd already crossed a line. It was then that she noticed something out of place, a small, tarnished lockbox tucked behind a row of books. The box was unassuming, its metal dulled by age, but the way it had been hidden felt deliberate. Clara knelt down, peering closer. The lock looked sturdy, but there was no key in sight. Why would someone hide something so carefully if it wasn't significant? The sound of footsteps approaching snapped her out of her thoughts. She stood quickly, smoothing her uniform as the door creaked open. It was Leonardo. His dark eyes swept the room before landing on her, and for a moment Clara thought he might say something, but he simply nodded, a faint acknowledgement of her presence, before walking to his desk. She slipped out quietly, her cheeks burning with the weight of being caught near his private space. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but the lockbox lingered in Clara's mind. It was as though the house itself was challenging her, daring her to uncover its secrets. That night, as she lay on her cot, she couldn't shake the feeling that the box held answers, not just to whatever mysteries surrounded the Velasco family, but perhaps to something larger. She didn't know why, but she felt certain it was important. The following morning, Clara was assigned to the kitchen, helping prepare breakfast for Leonardo and his daughter, Sophia. The girl was seated at the counter, scrolling aimlessly through her phone. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a sweater that probably cost more than Clara made in a month. But there was an unmistakable weariness in her expression. "Do you need anything, Miss Sophia?" Clara asked gently. Sophia glanced up, her lips twitching in what might have been an attempt at a smile. "No, thanks." There was a pause before she added, almost as an afterthought, "You don't have to call me Miss. Just Sophia is fine." Clara nodded, unsure how to respond. She returned to her task, but she could feel Sophia's gaze on her. Finally, the girl spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "Do you think money solves everything?" The question caught Clara off guard. She turned to face Sophia, who was now staring at her phone, as though the question hadn't escaped her lips. "I think," Clara began carefully, "money makes life easier in some ways, but it can't fix everything." Sophia looked up, her eyes sharp despite the tiredness in them. "That's what everyone says, but they don't know what it's like to live in this house." There was an edge to her voice, a bitterness that hinted at wounds far deeper than Clara could see. Before Clara could respond, Leonardo entered the room. His presence was commanding, as always, and whatever vulnerability Sophia had shown vanished in an instant. She slipped off her stool, muttering something about school, and disappeared down the hall. Leonardo watched her go before turning his attention to Clara. "Has Maria given you your assignments for today?" he asked. His tone was neutral, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made Clara feel as though she were being evaluated. "Yes, sir," she replied quickly. "I'm to clean the east wing." He nodded, dismissing her with a slight wave of his hand. But as Clara left the room, she couldn't help but feel that his question wasn't as casual as it had seemed. There was something calculating about the way he spoke, as though every word was weighed and measured. That evening, Clara returned to the West Wing, her curiosity about the lockbox gnawing at her. The house was quiet, its usual hum of activity replaced by an unsettling stillness. She entered the office, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, and approached the bookshelf. The lockbox was still there, exactly as she'd left it. This time, she reached for it, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't know what she hoped to find, but as her fingers brushed the cold metal, she felt a strange sense of anticipation, as though whatever was inside the box would set something in motion that couldn't be undone. The lockbox stayed with Clara, not in her hands, but in her thoughts, haunting her like a whisper just out of reach. Each time she stepped into Leonardo's office, it called to her, its dull metallic surface seeming to pulse with the weight of whatever secrets it held. But Clara wasn't reckless. She had learned, over a lifetime of survival, that patience often revealed more than impulsiveness ever could. Her days were now split between carefully completing her tasks and navigating the subtle unease that clung to the mansion like a shadow. Leonardo's presence was steady yet distant, his sharp eyes darting over her like a passing wind, unseen but felt. Sophia, however, was a different story. The girl's icy walls were beginning to thaw, revealing cracks through which glimpses of her true self slipped. It was during one of these moments, as Clara folded laundry in the expansive utility room, that Sophia lingered in the doorway. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Sophia asked abruptly, her voice cutting through the soft hum of the dryer. Clara turned, surprised. "Leaving?" "Here," Sophia clarified, waving her hand vaguely. "This house, this life. Doesn't it suffocate you?" Clara hesitated, folding a blouse neatly before placing it in the pile. "It's not my life to leave," she said carefully. "And you? Do you feel that way?" Sophia leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed. "Sometimes, all this money, all these people, they think it makes us untouchable, like we have everything, but they don't know what it's like to feel trapped by it." She paused, her gaze dropping to the floor. "It's not as perfect as it looks." Clara's heart ached at the vulnerability in Sophia's voice. She wanted to offer comfort, but the words felt inadequate. Instead, she said, "Sometimes people mistake having money for having freedom. But even the richest people have their own chains." Sophia looked up, startled by the insight. For a brief moment, her guarded expression softened, but before Clara could say more, Sophia straightened and walked away, her walls snapping back into place. Clara watched her go, wondering what kind of chains Sophia carried, and whether they were tied to the secrets that lingered in this house. That evening, Clara found herself alone in the mansion's library. A vast room filled with books. She could scarcely imagine anyone had time to read. She'd come to return a tray of coffee cups left behind from one of Leonardo's meetings, but the solitude of the space drew her in. The air smelled of aged paper and polished wood, a comforting blend that reminded her of the small public library she used to escape to as a child. Her fingers brushed the spines of the books as she wandered, marveling at the sheer variety of subjects. Finance, art, history, and even some obscure titles on psychology. She paused at one shelf, her eyes catching on a single book that seemed out of place. It was an old, leather-bound volume, its title faded and illegible. When she pulled it free, a folded piece of paper fell from between its pages and fluttered to the floor. Clara hesitated, glancing around the empty room before kneeling to retrieve the paper. It was a letter, handwritten in a neat, feminine script. The words were concise but carried a weight that made Clara's chest tighten. You've always told me that money can fix anything, but you're wrong. Some wounds can't be healed no matter how much you spend. If you won't listen, then I have no choice but to take matters into my own hands. You'll thank me someday. Laura. Clara's fingers trembled as she refolded the letter and slipped it back into the book. Laura, Leonardo's late wife. The name had been whispered around the house like a forbidden word, spoken only in hushed tones and quickly dismissed. But this letter suggested a truth far different from the idyllic narrative Clara had imagined. What had Laura meant by taking matters into her own hands? And why did it sound like a warning? The questions swirled in Clara's mind as she replaced the book on the shelf and hurried out of the library. The house felt different now, as though the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. Clara didn't know what she had stumbled upon, but she was certain of one thing. She couldn't ignore it. The next day, Sophia sought her out again, this time in the garden. Clara was trimming the hedges when the girl appeared, her face pale and drawn. "You found something, didn't you?" Sophia asked, her tone sharp and urgent. Clara froze. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb," Sophia snapped, stepping closer. "I've seen the way you look at my dad's office and the library. You're curious, aren't you? About her." Clara's heart raced. "Sophia, I don't know what you're—" "Don't lie to me." Sophia's voice cracked, and for the first time, Clara saw tears welling in her eyes. "I need to know. Please." Clara's resolve wavered as she saw the desperation in the girl's face, but before she could respond, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the moment. They both turned, watching as a sleek black vehicle came to a stop. A man stepped out, his dark suit crisp and intimidating. He exchanged a few words with the driver before heading toward the front door. Sophia's expression darkened. "That's him," she muttered. "Who?" Clara asked, but Sophia didn't answer. She simply turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Clara with a sinking feeling in her stomach. Whoever the man was, his arrival felt like the first ripple in a storm that was about to consume them all. The air in the mansion felt heavier that evening, as if the arrival of the man in the black suit had unsettled the very foundation of the house. Clara had seen him briefly in the foyer, speaking with Leonardo in a hushed but heated tone. The tension in their interaction had been palpable, and though she tried to keep her head down, Clara couldn't help but catch snippets of their conversation. "You promised results," the man had said, his voice low and sharp. "We're running out of time, Leonardo. If this doesn't come through, the fallout will be catastrophic for you and your entire family." Leonardo's response was too quiet for her to hear, but his body language spoke volumes. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched at his sides, and there was an unfamiliar vulnerability in his stance. It was a side of him Clara hadn't seen before, a stark contrast to the composed, almost unshakable man she'd come to know. Clara retreated to the kitchen, but her mind raced with questions. What could be so dire that it rattled someone like Leonardo? And why did it feel as though the house itself was caught in the crossfire of whatever storm was brewing? Later that night, Clara lingered in the hallway outside the West Wing. The mansion was quiet. The staff retired to their quarters, and the family presumably in their rooms. But the light spilling from the crack beneath Leonardo's office door suggested he was still awake. Clara hesitated, debating whether to return to her room or risk a closer look. Before she could decide, the door opened and Leonardo stepped out. "Clara," he said, startled but quickly regaining his composure. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of suspicion. "What are you doing here?" "I was just finishing up," Clara stammered, holding up a dusting cloth she'd grabbed from the cart earlier. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Leonardo studied her for a moment before nodding. "Go on then. It's late." She nodded, retreating quickly down the hallway. But as she turned the corner, she glanced back and saw him re-enter the office, closing the door firmly behind him. The sight only deepened her curiosity. What was he hiding in there? The next day brought no answers, only more questions. Clara noticed subtle changes in the household. Leonardo was more withdrawn than usual, his phone glued to his ear as he paced the hallways. Sophia was restless, her mood shifting between sullen silence and sudden bursts of anger. Even the staff seemed on edge, whispering among themselves whenever they thought no one was listening. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the mysterious man in the black suit was the catalyst for it all. She thought of the lockbox hidden in Leonardo's office and the letter she'd found in the library. Were they connected to the growing tension in the house? And if so, what role did Laura, Leonardo's late wife, play in it all? That evening, Clara found herself drawn to the West Wing once again. This time, she was determined to act. Waiting until the house had settled into its usual nighttime stillness, she slipped into Leonardo's office. Her hands trembled as she approached the bookshelf, but her resolve was firm. She had to know what was in the lockbox. The box was heavier than she expected, its cool metal sending a shiver through her fingers. Clara searched the desk drawers, hoping to find a key, but they were empty save for stacks of neatly arranged documents. Her gaze fell on a small safe built into the wall behind the desk. It was slightly ajar, as though someone had been in a rush to close it. Inside, she spotted a set of keys, one of which matched the lockbox perfectly. Her heart pounded as she inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open, and Clara lifted the lid to reveal a bundle of papers and a small velvet pouch. The papers were contracts, riddled with legal jargon she didn't fully understand. But one phrase caught her eye: financial restructuring agreement. The dates were recent, and Leonardo's signature was scrawled at the bottom of each page. Clara frowned, flipping through the documents. From what little she could decipher, it appeared that Leonardo had been funneling money into a series of risky investments. The financial stakes were astronomical, and the potential fallout was devastating. The weight of the situation pressed down on her as she realized just how much trouble the Velasco family was in. Her attention shifted to the velvet pouch. She opened it carefully, revealing a collection of polished gemstones, diamonds, rubies, and emeralds that sparkled even in the dim light. Clara stared, stunned. Why would Leonardo keep something so valuable hidden away like this? And why did it feel like these jewels were more than just a means of preserving wealth? A sudden noise from the hallway snapped Clara out of her thoughts. She hurriedly closed the lockbox, returning it to its place and locking it with shaking hands. As she stepped out of the office, she collided with Sophia, who was standing just outside the door. "What are you doing in there?" Sophia demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. Clara struggled to come up with an excuse, but Sophia didn't wait for an answer. She grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her toward the stairs. "If you want to know the truth, follow me," Sophia said, her tone low and urgent. They ended up in the library, where Sophia slammed the door shut and turned to face Clara. "I know my dad's hiding something," Sophia said, her voice trembling with emotion. "And I know you've seen things you're not supposed to, so tell me the truth. What did you find?" Clara hesitated, torn between her loyalty to Leonardo as her employer and the raw desperation in Sophia's eyes. But before she could decide, Sophia stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If you don't help me, I'll never find out what happened to my mom." The words hit Clara like a thunderclap. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Sophia's expression darkened. "My mom didn't just die, Clara. Something happened to her. And I think my dad knows what it was. Clara couldn't shake Sophia's words. They echoed in her mind long after the girl left the library, filling the quiet halls of the mansion with an unrelenting weight. My mum didn't just die. The rawness in Sophia's voice had been unmistakable, laced with both pain and a hunger for answers. For Clara, it opened a door she hadn't been prepared to walk through, one that seemed to lead deeper into the shadows of the Velasco family. The next morning, Clara moved through her tasks distractedly, dusting the edges of the grand dining table, polishing silverware that sparkled as if untouched by time. These routine motions were no longer enough to calm her. Every room in the mansion seemed to hold a secret, and Clara was beginning to realize just how tangled they all were. Her thoughts kept circling back to the lockbox, to the documents detailing Leonardo's financial gambles, and to the pouch of gemstones whose purpose she couldn't yet grasp. That evening, Clara found Sophia waiting for her in the garden. The girl was perched on a stone bench near the fountain, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the evening. "You came," Sophia said, her voice quieter than usual. "You didn't give me much of a choice," Clara replied, sitting down beside her. "What do you mean your mother didn't just die? What happened?" Sophia hesitated, her gaze fixed on the rippling water in the fountain. "The official story is that it was an accident. She fell down the stairs late at night. Dad said she must have slipped, but..." Her voice cracked, and she looked away, blinking rapidly. "She never used those stairs. Ever." Clara's stomach tightened. "Why wouldn't she use them?" "They lead to the basement," Sophia explained. "She hated that part of the house. She used to say it felt like a prison, like it didn't belong here." She paused, her voice dropping lower. "Sometimes I think maybe she knew something she wasn't supposed to." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Clara felt a chill despite the balmy evening. What could Laura have known that was so dangerous? And why had Leonardo been so quick to dismiss Sophia's concerns? "I need to know what you found in my dad's office," Sophia said, turning to face Clara. Her eyes were pleading now, but there was a steeliness in her tone that left no room for argument. "I saw you go in there. I know you found something." Clara sighed, the weight of her discoveries pressing down on her. "I don't know if it's connected to your mother," she admitted, "but your father, he's in trouble, Sophia. Financial trouble. I found contracts, agreements that show he's been making risky investments. And then there were the gemstones." "Gemstones?" Sophia interrupted, her brow furrowing. "What gemstones?" Clara described the velvet pouch, her voice faltering as she tried to convey the sense of unease it had given her. Sophia listened intently, her expression shifting from confusion to determination. "Those weren't my dad's," she said firmly. "They were my mum's. She used to have this necklace, this ridiculous thing covered in jewels. Dad hated it. He said it was gaudy, but she wouldn't stop wearing it. She said it was her insurance policy." Clara frowned. "Insurance against what?" "I don't know," Sophia admitted, "but she used to say it like a joke. When the walls come crashing down, I'll still have my little safety net." She shook her head, frustration etched into her features. "I never knew what she meant, but now..." The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was still incomplete. Clara could feel the edges of the puzzle pressing against her, but the center remained a blur. Who was Laura really, and what had she been trying to protect herself from? Later that night, Clara returned to the West Wing. She had tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't settle. The mansion was quiet, the only sound the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She crept into the office, her steps cautious but purposeful. This time, she wasn't just looking for answers. She was determined to find them. She approached the desk, her hands trembling as she opened the drawers once more. This time, she found something she had missed before. A photograph tucked beneath a stack of papers. It showed Leonardo and Laura, their arms wrapped around each other, standing in front of the mansion's grand staircase. But there was something off about the photo. Clara tilted it under the light, squinting at the background. There, just barely visible in the shadows, was the edge of a metal door. A door she hadn't seen in the house before. Clara's breath caught. The basement. That had to be where the door led, and if Laura had avoided it so adamantly, then it might hold the answers they were searching for. Before she could think too much about it, Clara heard footsteps approaching. She quickly tucked the photograph back into the drawer and stepped away from the desk. The door opened and Leonardo walked in, his face dark with exhaustion. He stopped short when he saw her, his eyes narrowing. "Clara," he said, his voice low and measured. "What are you doing here?" I was just..." she began, but he cut her off. "Don't lie to me." His tone was sharper now, and Clara felt the full weight of his presence bearing down on her. "Why were you in my office?" Clara hesitated, her mind racing for an explanation that wouldn't reveal too much. But before she could answer, Leonardo stepped closer, his expression softening slightly. "You've been asking questions, haven't you?" he said, his voice quieter now. "About Laura, about me." Clara nodded, her throat dry. "I just want to understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sophia doesn't understand what she's digging into," Leonardo interrupted, his tone sharp again. "And neither do you. Some things are better left buried." The words sent a chill down Clara's spine. But as Leonardo turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the office, she couldn't help but think, what if those things buried in the past are the key to everything? The house was alive with attention. Clara could almost feel pressing against her skin. Leonardo's warning lingered in her mind, his words replaying with an ominous finality. Some things are better left buried. But Clara couldn't let it go. Not after seeing Sophia's pain, not after uncovering pieces of a truth that seemed poised to break through the surface like cracks in glass. Whatever Leonardo wanted to keep hidden, Clara felt certain it held the answers Sophia, and perhaps even Leonardo himself, desperately needed. The following morning, Clara found herself near the basement stairs. They were tucked away at the far end of the east wing, past a narrow hallway that always seemed colder than the rest of the house. She stood at the top, staring down into the shadows below. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath, daring her to descend. Her heart pounded as she gripped the railing, taking the first step. The basement was surprisingly spacious, its stone walls lined with wooden shelves filled with storage boxes. The dim light from a single bulb cast long, eerie shadows, making the space feel more cavernous than it was. Clara's gaze swept the room, searching for the door she'd seen in the photograph. She spotted it near the back, partially obscured by an old cabinet. It was made of reinforced steel, its edges rusted but still solid. A heavy lock hung from its handle. Clara moved toward it, her pulse quickening. She tugged at the lock, but it didn't budge. Frustration bubbled within her, and she stepped back, scanning the room for anything that might help. That's when she noticed a set of keys hanging on a hook near the stairs. They were old and worn, but one of them looked like it might fit. Her hand trembled as she inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open, the sound echoing in the stillness. Clara pushed the door open, revealing a small, dimly lit room beyond. Inside, there was a desk covered in stacks of papers, an old filing cabinet, and a safe embedded in the wall. But what caught her attention was the framed photograph sitting on the desk. It was Laura, smiling brightly, holding what looked like a document in her hand. Written across the bottom in bold letters was the word "claim." Clara frowned, her gaze shifting to the papers scattered across the desk. They were contracts and legal documents, many of them stamped with official seals. Words like inheritance, trust fund, and estate jumped out at her. As she sifted through them, A disturbing pattern began to emerge. It seemed Laura had been secretly moving large sums of money into private accounts just before her death. Clara's fingers brushed against an envelope sealed with wax. She hesitated, then opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter. To whoever finds this, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't finish what I started. I've tried to protect Sophia and Leonardo, but the truth is bigger than me. There are people who would stop at nothing to silence me, and I fear I've already crossed a line I can't come back from. If something happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Please, protect my family. Tell them the truth. Laura. Clara's breath hitched as the implications of the letter sank in. Laura hadn't fallen down the stairs by accident. She'd been silenced. But why? And by whom? The sound of footsteps above made Clara freeze. Someone was coming. She quickly tucked the letter into her pocket and left the room, closing the door behind her. She managed to lock it just as the footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Clara! Leonardo's voice called out. It was sharp, impatient. Are you down there? She took a deep breath, steadying herself before answering. Yes, sir. I was organizing some of the storage boxes. Leonardo appeared at the top of the stairs, his expression unreadable. Leave that to the staff assigned here. I don't want anyone in the basement without my permission. Clara nodded, hurrying past him. But as she climbed the stairs, she couldn't shake the feeling that Leonardo knew she had found something. His gaze lingered on her back, heavy and questioning. That evening, Clara shared her discoveries with Sophia. They sat in the garden under the fading light of the sun, the letter between them. Sophia read it in silence, her face pale and drawn. She knew, Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. She knew someone was after her. Clara nodded. It looks like your mom was trying to protect you and your father, but something went wrong. Sophia clutched the letter, her knuckles white. My dad knows something, she said firmly. He has to, and I'm going to make him tell me. Clara placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. Be careful, she warned. Whoever your mom was up against, they're still out there, and they might be watching. Sophia looked at her, a flicker of fear crossing her face. But it was quickly replaced by determination. I don't care, she said. I need the truth. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the mansion in shadows, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were all standing on the edge of something dangerous. The secrets buried in the Velasco family were deeper than she had imagined, and the cost of uncovering them was becoming clearer with every step. The house felt like it was holding its breath. Every corner seemed to hum with the tension that had built since Clara found Laura's letter. Sophia's determination had ignited something in the both of them, a shared need for answers, no matter the cost. But Clara couldn't ignore the sense of danger that now loomed over them, an unseen force that seemed to be circling closer with each passing moment. Sophia wasted no time confronting her father. Clara watched from a distance as their voices rose in the study, muffled but unmistakably heated. Sophia's accusations were sharp and direct, demanding to know what Leonardo was hiding about her mother's death. Leonardo's responses were controlled but firm, his tone laden with warning. Clara didn't need to hear every word to know the conversation ended unresolved. Sophia stormed out, her face a mask of fury and frustration. That night, Clara found Sophia in the library, pacing the length of the room like a caged animal. He's lying, Sophia said as soon as she saw Clara. I know he is. He keeps saying it was an accident, but he won't tell me why she was even on those stairs. And when I mentioned the letter, she stopped, her jaw tightening. He froze, Clara. He didn't even deny it, just said I shouldn't dig into things I don't understand. Clara's heart ached for her. Maybe he's trying to protect you, she suggested gently. Protect me from what? Sophia snapped. The truth? That's what he's afraid of. Clara didn't have an answer. She wished she could offer Sophia reassurance, but the more she learned, the more uncertain everything became. She thought of the gemstones, the hidden contracts, the cryptic warnings in Laura's letter. It was clear that Laura had been fighting a battle Leonardo didn't want to acknowledge, and now that battle was spilling over into their lives. The next day, the tension in the house escalated when the man in the black suit returned. Clara caught sight of him in the hallway, his presence as imposing as ever. This time, his meeting with Leonardo wasn't confined to the study. They spoke openly in the dining room, their voices sharp and angry. Clara lingered nearby, pretending to dust as she strained to hear. "You're running out of time, Velasco," the man said. "The people I represent aren't patient. They expect results, and they don't care how you get them." Leonardo's response was calm but clipped. "I told you, I'm handling it." "Are you?" The man's voice was laced with skepticism. "Because it doesn't look that way from where I'm standing." Clara ducked out of sight as they moved toward the foyer. The conversation had left her shaken. Whoever the man represented, it was clear they held significant power over Leonardo. And judging by Leonardo's increasingly strained demeanor, the stakes were higher than she'd realized. Later that evening, Clara decided to investigate further. With Sophia's blessing, she returned to the basement, determined to uncover whatever secrets Laura had been trying to protect. Armed with a flashlight, she moved quickly through the shadows, her steps light but purposeful. She went straight to the hidden room, her hands steady as she unlocked the door. This time she focused on the safe embedded in the wall. It took some effort to find the combination, scribbled in faint pencil on the back of an old ledger. But the safe eventually clicked open. Inside, Clara found a stack of documents, thicker than she expected. As she sifted through them, her stomach sank. These weren't just financial records, they were detailed accounts of transactions, offshore accounts, and shell companies, all linked to Velasco Enterprises. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. Clara couldn't understand every detail, but one thing was clear. Leonardo had been involved in activities that blurred the line between legitimate business and outright corruption, and Laura had known about it. Among the papers was a folder labeled Settlement Agreement. Clara opened it carefully, her breath catching as she read the terms. It outlined a deal between Leonardo and an unnamed party, offering a substantial payout in exchange for silence. The date on the document was just days before Laura's death. Clara's hands trembled as she closed the folder. This wasn't just about money, it was about power. Whatever Laura had stumbled upon, it was enough to threaten someone's entire empire. And they'd made sure she couldn't expose it. As Clara left the basement, her mind raced with questions. Had Laura intended to sign the settlement? Or had she refused, sealing her fate in the process? And where did Leonardo stand in all of this? Was he complicit, or was he just as trapped as Laura had been? When Clara returned to the main house, she found Sophia waiting for her in the garden. The girl's face was pale, her expression tight with worry. "What did you find?" Sophia asked. Clara hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "Your father, he's been making deals," she said carefully. "Deals that put your mother in danger. She found out about them, and I think she tried to stop him." Sophia's eyes widened, her breath hitching. "Are you saying he's responsible?" "I don't know," Clara admitted, "but I do know she was trying to protect you." The words hung between them, heavy and unspoken. Sophia looked away, her jaw clenched. "I need to talk to him," she said finally. "I need to know the truth." "Sophia, wait," Clara said, grabbing her arm. "You need to be careful. Whoever your mom was up against, they're still out there. And if they think you're getting too close—" "I don't care," Sophia interrupted, her voice fierce. "If he's hiding something, I'm going to find out. no matter what. Clara watched her go, a sense of dread settling in her chest. Sophia's determination was admirable, but it was also dangerous. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the Velasco family's secrets weren't just shadows, they were storms waiting to break. And Clara had the sinking feeling that when they did, none of them would escape unscathed. The atmosphere in the mansion shifted in a way Clara couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't just tense, it was oppressive, like the air itself was bracing for something inevitable. Sophia's confrontation with Leonardo the previous night had left a ripple effect that spread through every room, every interaction. Clara found herself walking more cautiously, speaking in softer tones, as though trying not to disturb the precarious balance holding everything together. Sophia, however, was far from cautious. She'd barely spoken since storming out of her father's study, her movements purposeful but laced with simmering anger. Clara knew the girl well enough now to see what was happening. Sophia was spiraling, her need for answers consuming her like a fire she couldn't extinguish. It wasn't long before Clara discovered the next spark. That morning, as she entered the kitchen to clean up after breakfast, she found Sophia seated at the counter. Spread out before her were photographs, documents, and a laptop displaying emails. Clara hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to interrupt. Sophia didn't look up, but her voice broke the silence. "He's been lying to me my entire life." Clara stepped closer, glancing at the array of papers. "What is all this?" "Proof," Sophia said bitterly. "Proof that my dad isn't the man he pretends to be." She picked up one of the photographs, holding it out for Clara to see. It was a grainy image of Leonardo shaking hands with a man who looked vaguely familiar. Clara studied it for a moment before realization struck. This was the man in the black suit, the one who had been coming and going from the house in recent weeks. "They've been working together for years," Sophia said, her voice tight with anger. "That guy, he's not just some associate, he's part of the reason my mom—" She stopped, her hands shaking as she set the photo down. "He's part of why she's gone." Clara's heart sank. "How did you find all of this?" Sophia gestured to the laptop. "I hacked into my dad's email. It wasn't hard. He's not exactly a tech genius." There was a flicker of dark humor in her voice, but it quickly faded. "I found contracts, wire transfers, even messages between him and that guy. They've been funneling money into offshore accounts, huge amounts. And my mom, she knew, she called him out on it." Clara felt a chill as the pieces began to align. The financial records in the basement, the settlement agreement, Laura's letter, all of it pointed to the same conclusion. "She must have been trying to expose them," Clara said, her voice low. "That's why she was a threat." "Exactly," Sophia said, her eyes blazing. "And now I'm going to finish what she started." Clara froze. "Sophia, no, you don't know what you're dealing with. These people, whoever they are, they're dangerous." Sophia looked at her, her expression defiant. "I don't care. I've spent my whole life being protected, being lied to. I'm not going to sit back and let this happen." Clara wanted to argue, but the determination in Sophia's voice was unshakable. She knew the girl wouldn't back down, no matter how much danger she faced. Later that evening, Clara's worst fears were confirmed. As she walked past Leonardo's study, she overheard another heated conversation between him and the man in the black suit. This time, their voices were louder, angrier, and there was no mistaking the urgency in their tones. "She's getting too close," the man said. "If she keeps digging, it's not just your reputation on the line, it's her life." Leonardo's response was clipped and furious. "You think I don't know that? She's my daughter, for God's sake." "That doesn't matter to them," the man snapped. "If she exposes this, they won't think twice about silencing her. You need to get her under control, or they will." The words sent a shiver down Clara's spine. She hurried away, her mind racing. Whoever these people were, their reach extended far beyond money or reputation. And if Sophia continued down this path, the consequences would be catastrophic. Clara found Sophia in her room that night, her laptop open and her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "Sophia," Clara said softly, stepping inside. "We need to talk." Sophia glanced up, her expression guarded. "If you're here to tell me to stop, don't bother. I'm not changing my mind." "It's not about that," Clara said. "It's about keeping you safe." Sophia's defenses faltered slightly, and she set the laptop aside. "What do you mean?" "I overheard your dad," Clara said, sitting beside her. "The people he's involved with, they're watching. They know what you're doing, and they won't hesitate to stop you, permanently." Sophia's face paled, but her resolve didn't waver. "Then we need to act fast," she said, "before they can do anything." Clara sighed, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She wanted to protect Sophia, to shield her from the danger that was closing in. But she also knew that Sophia wouldn't stop. Not now, not when she was so close to the truth. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of raised voices. She hurried downstairs to find Sophia confronting her father in the dining room. The tension in the air was electric, and every word they exchanged felt like a dagger. "Why won't you just tell me the truth?" Sophia demanded, her voice shaking. "What are you so afraid of?" Leonardo's face was pale, his expression stricken. "Sophia, you don't understand." "No," she interrupted. "You don't understand. Mom is dead because of you. And now you're just going to let them—" "Enough!" Leonardo's voice cracked like a whip, silencing her. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling. "You don't know what you're talking about. You think this is just about money, about greed? It's bigger than that, bigger than all of us." Sophia stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Then explain it to me," she said, her voice quieter but no less fierce. "Tell me what's so big that it was worth her life." Leonardo didn't answer. He simply turned and walked away, leaving Sophia standing alone in the silence. Clara stepped forward, placing a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "We'll figure this out," she said, though her own voice wavered with uncertainty. Sophia didn't respond. She simply stared at the doorway her father had disappeared through, her jaw set and her eyes blazing with determination. Whatever the cost, she was going to uncover the truth, and Clara knew there was no stopping her now. The mansion felt like it was holding its breath, the silence heavier than Clara had ever known. Days had passed since Sophia's explosive confrontation with Leonardo, but the air between them was still charged with unspoken tension. Leonardo had retreated into himself, spending hours locked away in his office, while Sophia worked tirelessly to piece together the remnants of her mother's story. Clara, caught in the middle, could do little but watch as father and daughter seemed to drift further apart, even as the danger around them closed in. Sophia had become relentless in her search for answers. She barely ate, barely slept, her energy fueled by a mix of grief, anger, and a burning need for the truth. Clara tried to support her as best she could, but she couldn't shake the sense of dread that grew with each new discovery. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Laura's death hadn't just been a tragedy, it had been a calculated act. And now, Sophia was walking the same dangerous path her mother had. One evening, Clara found Sophia in the library, surrounded by documents and photographs. "I found something," Sophia said, her voice tight with urgency. She handed Clara a photograph, her hands trembling slightly. It showed Laura standing with a group of people at what looked like a charity event. Clara recognized Leonardo in the background, his expression unreadable. But it was the man standing beside Laura that caught her attention. It was the man in the black suit. "That's him," Sophia said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "He was there, Clara. He knew my mom. He wasn't just some associate. He was part of her life." Clara frowned, studying the photograph. "Do you think she trusted him?" Sophia shook her head. "I don't know. But if she did, she was wrong. He's been working with my dad for years, and whatever they were involved in, it's what got her killed. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The connections were becoming clearer, but they only raised more questions. What role had the man in the black suit played in Laura's life? And how far had Leonardo gone to protect his family and himself? That night, Clara decided to confront Leonardo. She found him in his study, staring out the window with a glass of whiskey in his hand. The room was dimly lit, the shadows deepening the lines of exhaustion etched into his face. For a moment, Clara hesitated, unsure if she should interrupt. But then she stepped forward, her voice steady. "Mr. Velasco, we need to talk." Leonardo turned, his expression guarded. "What is it, Clara?" "It's about Laura," she said carefully, "and Sophia." At the mention of their names, Leonardo's jaw tightened. He set his glass down on the desk and gestured for her to continue. "I know you're trying to protect Sophia," Clara said, "but whatever you're hiding, it's only putting her in more danger. She's not going to stop until she knows the truth. And if you don't tell her, someone else will." Leonardo's eyes darkened, and for a moment Clara thought he might dismiss her. But then he sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "You think I don't know that?" he said, his voice low and bitter. "You think I don't see what this is doing to her? Then tell her," Clara urged. "Tell her what happened to Laura. Tell her why this man keeps showing up. She deserves to know." Leonardo hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "It's not that simple," he said finally. "There are things you don't understand, things that Laura got involved in, things that I got involved in. If Sophia knew the full truth," he trailed off, his voice breaking, "it would destroy her." Clara stepped closer, her voice softening. "The truth might hurt her, but the lies are hurting her more." Leonardo didn't respond. He turned back to the window, staring out into the darkness as though searching for something he couldn't find. That same night, Sophia made a bold move. Clara found her in the basement, her laptop balanced on a crate as she typed furiously. "What are you doing?" Clara asked, her voice sharp with alarm. Sophia didn't look up. "I hacked into his files," she said. "I found the offshore accounts, and I found the payments." Clara's stomach dropped. "Sophia, this is dangerous. If they find out—" "I don't care," Sophia interrupted, her voice fierce. "They need to know that I won't back down. If they think they can scare me, they can do more than scare you," Clara said, her voice rising. "Sophia, please. This isn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It's about survival." But Sophia wasn't listening. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her focus unshakable. Clara could only watch in helpless silence as Sophia uploaded the documents to an anonymous server, her defiance burning like a flame in the darkness. By the time Sophia returned to the main house, it was late. The mansion was quiet, the staff long since retired to their quarters. Clara followed her upstairs, her mind racing with worry. But before they reached Sophia's room, they heard a sound that stopped them in their tracks. The front door was creaking open. Clara and Sophia froze, their eyes meeting in silent alarm. They crept down the stairs, careful to avoid making any noise. At the bottom, they saw a figure silhouetted against the dim light of the foyer. It was the man in the black suit. He turned, his expression cold and calculating. "Miss Velasco," he said, his voice calm but laced with menace. "We need to have a little chat." The man in the black suit stood in the foyer, his presence casting a shadow that seemed to seep into every corner of the mansion. His calm demeanor was unsettling, a stark contrast to the tension radiating from Sophia and Clara. Clara instinctively stepped in front of Sophia, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you want?" Clara demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The man's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "Relax, I'm just here to talk." He glanced at Sophia, his gaze sharp and unrelenting. "But only if Miss Velasco is willing to listen." I have nothing to say to you, Sophia shot back, her tone defiant. Whatever you think you're going to do, it won't work. The man took a slow step forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Oh, but it already has. You see, Sophia, you've been playing a very dangerous game. Hacking into accounts, uploading files. Did you really think that would go unnoticed? Clara's stomach twisted. They'd been caught. Every move Sophia had made, every document she'd exposed, it had all been tracked, and now the consequences were standing right in front of them. Sophia's defiance faltered, but only for a moment. The truth is out there now, she said, lifting her chin. You can't stop it. The man's smile widened, though it didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps not, but there's still plenty left to lose. What do you mean? Clara asked, stepping forward. The man turned to her, his expression indifferent. I mean that Miss Velasco's little rebellion doesn't just put her in danger. It puts her father in danger, her home, her future. Do you really think the people I work for will let this slide? They'll come for everything. Clara's chest tightened as she glanced at Sophia, who was trying to mask her fear with anger. You're bluffing, Sophia said, her voice wavering slightly. Am I? The man replied. Your father already knows what's at stake. That's why he stayed in line all these years. But you, he shook his head, his tone almost pitying. You don't understand how this world works, do you? Before Sophia could respond, another voice cut through the tension. That's enough. Leonardo appeared at the top of the staircase, his face pale but resolute. He descended slowly, his eyes locked on the man in the black suit. Leave my daughter out of this? The man turned, his expression unreadable. Leonardo, I was wondering when you'd show up. I mean it, Leonardo said, his voice firm. If you have a problem, you deal with me. Leave Sophia and Clara alone. The man tilted his head as if considering the demand. And what about the files she leaked? The damage she's already done. I'll fix it, Leonardo said. I'll make it right. Clara watched the exchange, her mind racing. Leonardo's tone wasn't just protective, it was resigned. He wasn't just trying to shield Sophia, he was taking responsibility for something much larger than she'd realized. The man seemed to weigh his options before nodding. You'd better, because if you don't... He let the sentence hang, the unspoken threat heavier than words. With a final glance at Sophia, he turned and walked out, the door closing softly behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia turned to her father, her expression a mix of anger and betrayal. You knew, she said. You knew they killed Mom, and you did nothing. Leonardo's shoulders sagged as he met her gaze. It's not that simple, Sophia. Then make it simple, she yelled. Tell me the truth. Leonardo hesitated, then sank into a chair, his face etched with defeat. Your mother found out things she wasn't supposed to, he said quietly, about the deals I made, the people I trusted. She wanted to expose them, but I begged her not to. I thought I could fix it before it got out of control. He looked at Sophia, his eyes filled with pain. I was wrong, and when she refused to back down, they made sure she couldn't speak. Sophia's face crumpled as the weight of his confession sank in. You let them get away with it, she whispered. I didn't have a choice, Leonardo said, his voice breaking. If I'd fought back, they would have come after you, after us. I thought I was protecting you. Clara stepped forward, her heart aching for both of them. What happens now? She asked. Leonardo looked at her, then at Sophia. Now, he said, we fight back, together. The words hung in the air, a fragile promise that carried the weight of years of guilt and regret. Clara didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. The Velasco family was no longer running. They were standing their ground. As the three of them sat in the quiet aftermath, Clara's thoughts turned to the viewers following their story. If you were in Sophia's shoes, would you fight for the truth, no matter the cost? Or would you protect the people you love, even if it meant living with the lies? Let us know your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.